the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Yeah, this time there is nothing. That's good.
Very good. So thanks for that. So I'll put the Stevens slide up for a second, and I will talk a little bit more about that. Dibs gave some of the background. Like many Stevens grads, I've gone on to do some very, very different things than my degree was in. I worked in the chemical industry for a little bit, but I went into the environmental business fairly on and was really a self-taught environmental engineer before that degree existed. And I've worked in air, water, solid waste, hazardous waste, Superfund groundwater. And I was in one of the first classes of certified hazardous material managers. And since the mid-'80s, I've worked strictly in recycling. And actually, I was in plastics recycling at first, and then moved into paper recycling. And Dibs mentioned it, and I will just go into a little bit more. I've been engaged with Dibs and my college to create the Friends of Sustainability to foster the sustainability program and very much try and foster alumni engagement in the sustainability program from a time and funding donation standpoint, and we hope to continue that work. So Dibs also talked about my paper recycling consulting background, so I won't say anything more about that. So if you want a copy of this presentation, just send me an email. And I would also note that this presentation was developed together with Susan Cornish of Insight in Action. And Susan's no stranger to Stevens and sustainability, in that we co-shared the first Friends of Sustainability award this past alumni weekend in June. And I'm no stranger to this series either, having given a presentation on the broad issue of recycling back in March. So on to the meat of the presentation today. Sustainable packaging issues. Why is it so important? Packaging is a very large volume material, both in the US and throughout the world. And before recycling kicked in the about 30 years ago, it was a major part of the waste stream. And since then, recycling its packaging is one of the largest components of recycling, but there's still a lot of packaging that is discarded. And some of it's because of the issues of how it's constructed. And this presentation will try and go forward with some knowledge about how do you design a sustainable packaging and what are the issues associated with it. So the key trends recently that have affected packaging is the pandemic and the growth of e-commerce. E-commerce has totally changed the world of packaging. And also there's a growing focus on sustainability among the brand owners, McDonald's, Shell, Target, PepsiCo, you name the big brand owner, and they have been working on sustainable packaging for some time. And then consumer attitudes towards sustainability are changing, and we'll go into a little bit of market research of what we learned about how consumers think about packaging. So the pandemic made changes up and down the supply chains. Consumers avoided going to stores, and shopping online really jumped up, and connected packaging emerged where consumers learned about the product through digital sources, so no need to touch the product or even go into the store to buy it. One thing I learned early on about e-commerce buying is always look at the size and weight or ounces. the picture doesn't tell you the whole story. I ordered some items that I'd been ordering all along, and I was shocked that when I got something that was a third of the size of what I was used to ordering. And also curbside pickup really kind of exploded, where retailers, you could order more in smaller shipments and pick it up outside of the store. And this required different equipment in the back rooms of the store. And the demand for hygienic packaging and food service functions really increased. And labor shortages and social distancing led to greater automation in plants and warehouses. And the major amount of supply chain problems occurred during the pandemic. And we are getting on the far side of most of those issues now, and the supply chain things are working through, and transportation costs are coming down. But the brand owners over the last 5+ years have had strong commitment to sustainability, and it comes from what consumers think about it. And all 25 of the largest consumer packaging goods company, we call them CPGs, have goals to increase recycled content, minimize packaging, and to increase reusable packaging. And 80% of them are working towards fully recyclable packages for all products by 2030. So packaging has several functions. The most important function of packaging is to protect the product and enable the product to be transported and enable the safety of that product. The second major issue that surrounds packaging is it's marketing, how something looks and jumps out. And that's brand owners seek to make their packaging jump out at it. And that also causes some problems, because some of the things that are used to make it more visible to the eye are also problems with recycling. And here's just a list of some of the top 5 CPGs of the world and their goals about recycling. And a lot of the goals are around plastic use and using recycled plastic or reducing the amount of plastic in packaging. And one thing about packaging is people think that packaging is oversized. And once you get past the safety and transport issues, everybody tries to minimize the amount of packaging. It costs money and it's not part of the product itself. So you really try and reduce the weight for transportation. You try and reduce the size. And the thought that everything's overpackaged is kind of a misnomer. But there are some things like when you get those big corrugated boxes and it has one little item in it, there are some strange reasons why that occur. And that's where some of the optimization in packaging is occurring. So here's some consumer research that we did into packaging and sustainability. And you can see the bar charts. And we did this twice. We did it in 2020, just before the pandemic, which was fortuitous. And then we did it again in 2022 towards the far end of the pandemic. So we got some interesting views. And people think that companies in the top 3 of the 4 areas that companies should be doing. If you look at that, and then if you look at the bottom 4 or 5, that's where the I's start to show up of what I am responsible for, the bottom 6 or 7. And if you look at the bar charts on the right-hand side, in 2020, you can see that it started with as much as 60% the companies should be replacing packaging, down to 40% that I consider myself to be an environmentally aware consumer, and down to looking for recyclability of the products they bought. And then if you look over to 2022, there was a real jump up, 18-point gains in what they think companies should be doing, all the way down to, and even the I side of things jumped anywhere from 15 to 18%. So that's a major move in consumer sustainability issues. And if we had done this probably in 2015 and 2010, we would have noticed steady movement in what consumers think about packaging and sustainability. So one question that always gets asked is, will consumers pay more for sustainable packaging? And between 30 and 40% will not pay any more, and up to a half will pay a little bit more, but less than 1/4 will pay a lot more. And sometimes the more sustainable packaging certainly can cost more. And again, we looked at 2020 and 2022. The bar chart in the middle here is the 2022, with the blue being would not pay any more. and the middle being pay a little bit more, and the sort of a minority share in deeper green there paying a lot more. And in the right-hand side, we show the 2020 as not and a lot. And again, you can see those numbers moved up, not as dramatically as some of the other numbers in the previous charts, but they moved up a little bit in all the categories. So consumer attitudes towards behavior. Attitude is one thing, behavior is another. So how important is sustainability as a driver of purchasing behavior? In 2022, the Global International Food Information Council determined that price is the single most important factor in food and beverage purchasing decisions, like the last slide showed. But when consumers were asked among three options, 15% they said they would purchase the more sustainable option, 46% would the mid-price, somewhat eco-friendly option, and 39% would select the lowest price. They didn't care about sustainability. And this really reflects what was on the previous slide. And while consumers may talk the talk when asked about their attitude to sustainability, factors such as price, value, and product benefits, such as flavor, are still important. So walking the walk is still somewhat behind talking the talk. And with growing inflation, will we see a slowdown or decline in the recent growth of interest in packaging, in purchasing sustainable packaging? I watched the recession cycles over quite some period of time, and the correlation between recessionary timeframes and people who are working in the green and sustainable fields. And in most of the early recessions I looked at, 75, 91, 2001, green and sustainability job positions, both in the public sector and the private sector, tended to go out the door first, along with advertising. And as we got towards 2008 and 2020, there was less of a downturn in businesses with regard to sustainability. However, a recent CEO survey talked about if we're going into a recession, where will you cut your costs in order to keep your company in a profitable situation? And sustainability did wind up to be number 3 out of there. So we're not totally there yet, but the impact has been changing in the right direction for some time now. So replacing plastics with paper. I call it the anti-plastic movement has got an enormous amount of momentum, and a lot of it stems from the plastic in the sea issue, which is really not so much of a packaging issue, but a litter issue. So there are 3 parts of packaging by typology. There's the primary packaging, which is the material that touches the product itself and is responsible for the safety of the package. The secondary packaging, which frequently is a corrugated box, protects the package for shipping. And then we have protective packaging and what we call dunnage. Dunnage is really cushioning what supports the primary package inside the secondary package. Or if there's only one package, it may protect the good inside the primary package. And as I mentioned before, packaging makes up a large part of residential waste generation, but the recyclability of packaging has definitely increased, but there's still a lot of packaging that goes to disposal. So the paper bottle is kind of one of my favorite ones to look at because paper fibers really don't hold water very well, and most of the paper bottle packages have polymer liners. There's some PET, polyethylene terephthalate, and some other polyethylene type resins. But people seem to really like the feel of these bottles, and there's been some trials in Europe about Carlsberg putting beer in paper bottles, and but the barrier issues are still there, and there's been some tries in tequila in Mexico, shipping tequila to Sweden. But the instructions to the consumer are you're supposed to peel the fiber off of the poly interlayer and then recycle the fiber with your papers, and then recycle your plastics with your plastic. How many consumers are really going to do that? A real minority. So there's some real issues. Now they are working on barrier coatings that are more repulpable, that they can be handled through the paper fiber route and not have to be separated by the consumer. Molded fiber packaging. Molded fiber is a type of packaging that has a high thickness and a lot of paper fiber attributes to it. If you think of paper egg cartons and gray paper drink carriers at McDonald's and other food businesses, those are examples of molded fiber. And the egg carton business is an interesting one to look at. In the late 1970s, about 95% of eggs came in molded fiber gray cartons. By 1995, only 5% was in molded fiber and 95% was in expanded polystyrene foam, EPS, a total shift. And by 2020, that actually has shifted back to 60% of egg cartons are now are paper fiber. And there's been a lot of innovation coming in paper fiber and molded fiber packaging. It's growing at 7 to 8% a year. Kraft Heinz introduced a ketchup bottle made with paper with molded fiber. But again, there was a spray-on food-grade coating inside to handle oil and aqueous products, and it is recyclable in typical residential curbside recyclable products. I haven't seen this one per se, but the power bowls on the right-hand side, I've seen a lot of those. In Conagra has introduced several new brands of frozen dinners where they replaced plastic with molded fiber. And Conagra says the carbon footprint of manufacturing bowls was reduced by 50 to 70% from plastics, decreasing their overall carbon footprint by almost 34,000 metric tons. So paperboard wrap, if you look at the products, two products in this page, the Bumblebee tuna ones and the Coors Light, those were both in the past packaged in plastic wrap. And in this past year, Bumblebee launched a recyclable paper packaging wrap, replacing shrink wrap. And it's 100% recycled material with 35% post-consumer content. And Coors spent $85 million to eliminate plastic rings from Coors Light and switch to paperboard wrap carriers instead. And the entire North American portfolio is expected to be in paper by the end of 2025. And it's expected to save 1.7 million pounds of plastic waste annually. One thing about packaging a decision is there's quite a long time before I say, I want to change my package, and then determine what that's going to be, gear up for the equipment and the substrate that's needed. It can typically take 2 years from deciding to do something in packaging before that new package appears on the shelf at a store. So it's quite a long chain. And we're just actually starting to see a lot of the work that started 2, 3, 4 years ago now get to the consumer. So on dairy and candy, in 2021, Chobani introduced a paper cup from 80% paperboard, and the cup does have a thin plastic lining, and it took them 2 years to develop that new package. And Nestle announced Smarties. Smarties aren't sold here in the U.S. That I know of, but they're sold in Canada and sold in Europe, and they're moving to a flexible paper packaging away from flexible polymers. The flexible polymer business is interesting. I mean, a large amount of goods are packaged in flexible packages, and flexible packages are a marvelous polymer and a marvelous packaging. And if you look at life cycle analysis or LCA, they actually do pretty well. But people have this anti-plastic movement, and the thing that makes these packages so great, that all sorts of barrier polymers and different polymer layers with different properties, makes them very difficult to recycle, because you either have to crack them back to the monomers or crack them into fuels. And that's really a downcycling, taking a highly sophisticated polymer and using it as a fuel instead of recycling is really what we call downcycling. And the package that's being used in Canada is a tough paper grade, which is flexible and is over-lacquered with a water-based dispersion coating. And then in personal care, Procter & Gamble, one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world, they did consumer surveys, and they are rolling out roll-on deodorant in paper tubes with 90% recycled content and fully recyclable to move away from plastics. And it's not just packaging. They on the right-hand side, they've moved shampoo brands, offer them in bars instead of packages. And they expect that to reduce virgin plastic use by 300 million bottles annually. And laundry detergents, Ariel, which is another P&G brand, is offering laundry detergent pods in recyclable paper boxes. And they've started out in Europe. Europe has, there's been more movement towards sustainable packaging and innovative packaging in Europe. And a lot of those things are starting to show up in the States now. In 2018, Tide developed the EcoBox to replace the large plastic bottle, but they found out the EcoBox was frequently damaged in e-commerce transit, so they had to back off on that. It had 60% less plastic than a traditional box, but it has a plastic liner. It's kind of like those wine boxes, but it's lighter and smaller and does save space in delivery trucks, thereby lowering shipping costs and improving sustainability. So e-commerce and secondary packaging. So here's a chart which shows e-commerce growth over time. The bottom green bar is total retail sales growth, and the top blue bar is e-commerce sales. And you can see the e-commerce growth rate's been trending just about 2 to 3 times the rate of all packaging, with the exception of 2021, when e-commerce slowed a bit after a torrid 2021, where 2020, because of the pandemic, e-commerce grew almost 32%. 14% is still a pretty healthy growth rate and in line with the past decade. But you can see all retail sales actually picked up pretty smartly in 20 and 21. So what are the implications of e-commerce on shipping? Initially, brands would send their products to online retailers' warehouse in the same primary packaging that the consumer would find at the store. But the packaging design that catch the shopper's eye in the store often did not survive in warehousing and shipping. Traditional brick and mortar retail has 5 to 6 touch points between the manufacturer and the consumer. E-commerce has 20 to 30 touch points, which greatly increases the number of times the product will be dropped or crushed. And the return rate for in-store brick and mortar averages 8 to 9% range, and e-commerce return rates are 20 to 30% for varying reasons. But it's well known that it's harder to order to get what you want on e-commerce, and the return policies are very liberal. Although I'll note that a few retailers are now going to start charging when you hit a certain level of returns. But shipping damage is a major cause of the returns. 20% of e-commerce product returns are due to shipping damage. And in the brick and mortar store, it's less than 5%. E-commerce retailers know that a damaged product can result in loss of customer. So that's one reason why they do overbox that secondary package, to ensure the products are not damaged. So optimizing secondary packaging, consumers, all consumer research says consumers are annoyed by what they think is wasted space and excess packaging materials. And shippers want to reduce the waste and the cost and not pay to ship boxes that average 50 to 70% air and dunnage. So there's a good nexus there between what consumers want and what the shippers want. And shippers optimize their strategies in several ways: lightweighting, focusing on thinner, lighter, stronger versions of packaging for the primary and secondary packaging, or what we call right sizing, sizing the shipping box relative to the product to reduce wasted space and dunnage. When you get those large corrugated boxes in e-commerce, one of the reasons is that a lot of people are still only stocking 1, 2, or 3 sizes of corrugated boxes. And therefore, when they ship their smaller packaging, it's always on the small side of the box. But the third bullet down there, fit to product technology, is where boxes are being punched out to the exact size of the product, so that you can have an infinite number of boxes produced exactly to the size of your product. And then the last one is called the SIOC, ship and own container, where you don't have secondary packaging, but the brands redesign product packaging so it can survive shipping without secondary packaging. And it's being first used for large products. And that's one of the answers, is don't design your packaging not to have secondary packaging. So among these strategies in North America, Amazon is big at work at reducing their packaging. And they've actually reduced their outbound shipments in corrugated boxes from 73% to 36% of all items. From 2016 to mid 2022. And they use 1.4 million corrugated boxes, even though they've increased their sales. They reduced their packaging waste by 27%. And they increased the use of mailers instead of boxes. So Amazon has a lot to do with packaging sustainability as one of the largest shippers in the world. So let's talk about mailers a little bit. How recyclable really are mailers? At first, Amazon started to switch over to plastic film mailers with bubble wrap cushioning. And those mailers might contain some recycled content, but they are generally not recyclable in any programs that were at drop-offs. And they were labeled with the recyclable arrows, and Amazon is in the midst of taking that off. There's the states are starting to take action for claims of recyclability and recycled content. California and Oregon are leading the way to get things labeled in a manner that's consistent with what the real recyclability of products are. The next bullet there is craft envelopes, brown, yellow craft envelopes with plastic bubble wrap. The envelope and the bubble wrap might contain recycled material, but they're totally non-recyclable. So there's been a shift, and if you noticed lately getting your padded mailers from Amazon and others, that third bullet down and the second picture on the right-hand side is a brown craft envelope with alternative fiber cushioning, and the envelope usually contains recycled fiber, and it is recyclable, but the cushioning materials might be lost in the process. And the last one, the ultimate, is a craft paper envelope with paper cushioning, and these generally have high amounts of recycled fiber, and the mailers themselves are fully recyclable. I would say that going back to that number one, film plastic, that it can be recyclable, but you generally have to take it to a drop-off or to grocery stores to recycle it, something which very few people, again, will do. So dunnage, cushioning, protection, I mentioned that earlier. Dunnage is any durable padding material used to protect a good. It fills out that empty space and ensures the product doesn't move or get damaged, and can protect from moisture. And the second bullet there, EPS, extended polystyrene, think peanuts. Peanuts were ubiquitous in packaging, and in the US, you hardly see them anymore. There's generally no recycled content with EPS, and they're not recyclable either. And you don't see a whole lot more of them now, but items shipped from Asia are often packed in EPS. If you get furniture from Southeast Asia, you frequently see that packed in EPS, not necessarily peanuts, but rigid foam corners. And electronic goods from Asia still generally come in EPS. The third bullet there is bubble wrap, which could contain recycling resin, but again, it's not recyclable in curbside or drop-off programs. And we're starting to see less bubble wrap. We are seeing more plastic air pillows, which could contain recycled resin, but are generally not recyclable, but they don't use a whole lot of materials. So they're mostly air for cushioning. So that's a good use of dunnage. Molded fiber, which I mentioned earlier, has really cut into the EPS market. If you order wine for shipment now, almost always it'll come in molded fiber. And 5 years ago, that came in styrofoam. If you order electronic goods that are sourced from the US, frequently the dunnage will be gray molded fiber. And again, 5 years ago, that almost assuredly would have been polystyrene foam. White news blank, that next bullet down, is just newspaper that hasn't been printed on. It can contain recycled fiber, although there's less these days in newsprint. And it's certainly fully recyclable, but the supply of this material, which was once common as a dunnage good, is declining. And then you have craft linerboard brown paper, which is often recyclable fiber and fully recyclable. And then in some cases, corrugated packaging itself, which contains recycled fiber and is fully recyclable. What's most used? Bubble wrap is still widely used. Air pillows are widely used. Craft paper. The fastest growing is molded fiber. So let's talk a little bit more detail about residential recycling of the paper packaging. So consumers are really confused about recycling. 92% of Americans feel they don't know their local recycling rules. And fewer than 6 in 10 say they actually dug into what those rules are. And 40% that center box admit tossing maybes in the recycling bin. And we call those folks the wish cyclers. I wish this was recyclable. But more than 3/4 of what these wish recyclers put in are actually not recyclable, and they wind up to be contamination. And they head to the landfill and they take other recyclables to it. Only 4% Americans admit they aren't confused by recycling rules. So we've got a lot of education to do. And recycling education is starting to come back. The US federal government through EPA is getting more involved in funding. And there's some movements towards standardizing throughout the US what recyclables are. And some states have moved to that also. And we're coming off the bottom through more education about what should be in your bin and what shouldn't be, and standardizing that across the bag. And a good example is plastic bags cannot be recycled at curbside anywhere. They're a problem material. They wrap around screens and conveyors at the processing facilities. And straws can't be recycled at all, but over half of US consumers believe they can be. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this supply, but it's the availability of recycling for the different paper packaging types. Corrugated boxes are the most recycled, residential recycling at over 60%. But all of those top 6 paper packaging, which are very common items, are recyclable at more than 60% of programs throughout the US. And the biggest urban myth was that pizza boxes are not recyclable. Please put them in your recycling bin. They are definitely recyclable. Don't put the pizza in it. A slice, a piece of crust or two isn't going to bother us too much. And grease is really not an issue. And as we move down, we can see molded fiber and aseptic and gable top cartons. Aseptic cartons are, think of juice boxes and wine in boxes. Aseptic packages are a 3-layer package with fiber being the dominant material, and it has a polyethylene layer and a thin aluminum layer for shelf stability. Gable top cartons, you can think of milk cartons, which are poly-coated paperboard, and some other items come in that. You can see those 3 white items on the right-hand side. And the one brown is molded fiber inside, and the top is all those paper packagings. Paper cups, other food service packaging is not included in many programs, but the paper cups are increasing, and we're seeing more food service packaging. Wrapping papers vary widely, but are generally not included. A lot of wrapping paper has a lot of ink on it, and also has a lot of foils for visual appeal, and that makes it not very recyclable. So residential curbside materials and capture rates based on the volume of municipal solid waste, MSW, generated. The Recycling Partnership, which really does a lot of good work, estimates that about 32% of all single-family waste is recovered. And corrugated cardboard is at the top at 62%, but so is glass containers. Glass containers are included in most programs. High-density polyethylene, natural bottles and jars come in again at a good 53%. Other mixed papers, think of mail, office papers at 46%, and colored HDPE bottles and PET bottles. And then we get down to aluminum cans, steel cans, aseptics, and at the bottom is bulky rigid plastics or the capture rate. So you can see we've got a lot of ground to gain on some of the materials at the bottom as well as those in the middle. So fiber-based packaging at the material recovery facility, we call it MRFs. So what is a MRF? A material recovery facility is the second stop in the residential recycling chain. Collection is first. You put it out in your bin and a collection truck comes by and picks it up. The MRFs sort and prepare different commodities for sale to end markets and manufacturers. And the MRF industry, there was no such thing as a MRF before 30 years ago, so it's a relatively young industry. And MRFs themselves are really a type of intermediate manufacturing operation. And the technology development in MRF process is still really an early maturity phase. And MRF technology is a mixture of mechanical and optical sorting systems. They are a ripe area for mechanical engineering development talent. So when we look at fiber packaging and the residential collection system, you can see that mixed paper, we'll take corrugated cardboard first, which is 14% corrugated boxes of the residential stream, but all other paper items caught in mixed paper, they account for 54% of the residential recyclables, followed by glass at just over 20%. And if you add up all the plastics that are down in that quadrant between about 6:30 and about 7 o'clock, you get about 5%. And then there's some other plastic packaging and bulk rigid plastics up at the top. Aluminum cans are a relatively small part of the packaging business, but they're doing quite well and they're highly recyclable, one of the most valuable materials. Steel cans are fairly highly recyclable. They're easy to separate. The magnets are used. And it's an old technology and it's picked up quite quickly. Aluminum cans are collected by what's called eddy current magnets, which repel aluminum. And a lot of the plastic containers are recovered by optical sorters, which can sort by resin type and by size and color also. Most of the cardboard boxes and mixed paper are handled by various types of screens and other kinds of angled sorting mechanisms to get the right material in the right place. The big task in a MRF is you bring in this mixture of all these materials, and then you want to separate them into separate commodities and bale them because they all have different end markets. So what are the requirements for successful material recovery? What is needed to sort out a package? First of all, you have to have sufficient volume. Things like paper cups, which are small volumes, are not enough to package separately, so they wind up in mixed paper. Things like PVC, there's not enough PVC generally in the recyclable stream to separate out those materials. And when you get into any of the specialty materials, there's not enough volume to put the equipment in and to spend the time separating out materials. An example is aseptic packaging, where people say, you know, if it takes me 3 months to get a truckload of aseptics from MRF, why should I think about separating them? Number two, the package must flow through the sorting line separately. If paper packaging winds up on the plastic container line, it might be disposed of. And most of the containers get separated by their three-dimensional size, and paper, for the most part, is two-dimensional, except if you have things like cups and other things like gable tops or aseptics. They're three-dimensional and they frequently wind up on the plastic side of things. Another item in recycling is size. If your material is smaller than 3 inches, it's going to be lost to residue. You should never put anything really tiny in your recycling bin because it's going to get lost to disposal. And there must be a demand for an end market for a paper grade or any grade of material that gets put into the recycling stream. So what kind of paper packages do MRFs see and not see? Paper cups are only small amounts, containers with foils, again, only small amounts. Interesting enough, they don't see a lot of pizza boxes, but there's a bit of push on to recycle pizza boxes. Another one that's at the bottom side, bottom at only 7% is that see none is paper mailing envelopes. We're starting to see more of those, and you can see we work our way up to different materials. So they do see a lot of pizza boxes and mailing envelopes on the bottom, but cups and foils and containers of polybags, they don't see a lot. Sorry that I had that transposed. So what doesn't make it through the MRF? As I mentioned, paper packaging, it stays in three-dimensional, might not wind up will wind up in the container arcs. And we lose a lot of cartons and food service packaging for that. But on the bottom, corrugated containers, OCC, are easily separable, and so are mailers and other paper packaging. So the more paper that becomes residue and disposed of can frequently be things that have food contaminants. So more paper, less plastic. Is it recyclable? So when we look at paper packaging, no problems or things that are generally water soluble. Making a paper is a water soluble process, and inks and adhesives and clay coatings on the left-hand side are no problem. Sometimes things are problems that have varnishes and some poly barriers, pressure sensitive labels, some metal components. Think of things like Pringles cans that have a paper tube but have metal ends. And bioplastics, which are emerging, are a problem. And plastic contaminants and hot melts and polys and foils are real problems. And most paper mills can't handle wet strength. Wet strength is what's put into paper fibers to make them water resistant. You see them in frozen foods, ice cream boxes, beer carriers, and wax coatings and labels. And foils and laminated foils are problem materials for paper mills. So the suggestions from the design for paper manufacturers, what brand owners should be doing. The first thing that came out for the paper mills was make your material only out of fiber-based packaging and avoid materials such as poly-coated metals and plastics. Avoid films, shrink wrap coating, embossing, and wax. Use single layers, not multi-layer, and use paper layers on paper packaging. One of the things these things fly in the face of is the ability to market your product and have it stand out. Those can be opposing attributes. Going back into history, the marketing departments and sales departments drove what packaging looked like. And now sustainability is entering into the discussion because consumers expect it. So with